Well, dear friends, I wanted to say to you that I was reflecting that sometimes when I'm typing an email and I'm typing the word meditation, I might look up at the screen and notice that I've typed medication. And I think, oh dear, lucky I happened to see that before I clicked send. Someone will think I'm very silly. Or sometimes I've even typed mediation. And then I reflected, well, actually, they're both right. It is so true that meditation is medicine. It's the best kind of medicine. And mediation, yes, that's part of our practice too. When we meditate, we still our body, we calm our body, we relax our body, and that helps us to calm our thinking, calm our emotions. And the breath is the key. The breath is our touchstone. You know, it's said the breath is the bridge between the body and the mind. And I reflect when I look at the 16 exercises and the full awareness of breathing, that it begins with our breath and goes on to the practice of mindfulness of the body. And then mindfulness of the feelings, mindfulness of our thoughts and mental formations, mindfulness of our perceptions, transforming the mind, nirvana, letting go, all the way through. So crystal clear, scientific. But does that mean, and this is a question I ask myself, that breathing and the body are basic, and then we really get down to the serious stuff, the mind? I think we could overlook the fact that the body helps the mind, and that the body has a huge amount of intelligence, wisdom, if we can learn to listen to it. And body and mind are one. When we meditate, we can bring our mind and our body into harmony. It's medicine because it can help us to heal. And for myself, I came to this practice in a very sort of low place in my life, with a lot of despair. And I began by practicing breathing and coming back to my body. And then I was so surprised that the emphasis is on joy and happiness. I thought I had to really look at on the despair, the unhappiness in my life. And I was astonished. But as I practiced, I discovered I did actually have some happiness in my life. And there was some joy there. And the more I looked and the more I practiced, the more it seemed to be there. And now when I look back, I know that it was a good foundation, a good solid foundation of being able to follow my breathing, take care of my body, have some happiness and joy in my life that gave me the strength to begin to be able to look at what I needed to address. And yet when it came to that, I found a lot of the despair had actually kind of melted away. There was still plenty, but a big shift had taken place. So it's wonderful medicine. And it's mediation too, accepting myself, accepting ourselves, reconciling with ourselves, And I think through the practice of meditation, mindfulness, we know, leads to concentration. Concentration leads to insight sooner or later, not necessarily on the cushion. The insights that I sometimes have had are when I'm taking the washing out of the washing machine or doing something very mundane, one might say, and that sort of clarity comes, that moment of clarity, precious, changes the way I feel about myself and another person. I wanted to give you a couple of examples of the way in which breathing has helped me hugely. You know, there's this saying, I'm sure you're familiar with it, we practice when it's easy, so that the practice is there to hold us when things get difficult. And that's certainly my experience. I think it must have been sort of 22, 23 years ago. I was ill and I became very ill and ended up in hospital. And I think it took about 16 hours before I was able to get a scan and then a diagnosis. And once I had the diagnosis, I knew the best thing I could do was to go back home and look after myself, because it was a sort of stomach condition. And I knew if I stayed in hospital, I'd be eating, well, what could I eat? White bread and white pasta and all the things that I couldn't possibly eat. I needed to go back home and continue with the very healing diet I'd discovered. So it was about 11 o'clock at night, and I had to sign a form in order to be able to go home, basically saying if I went home and died, it was my responsibility, which was not sort of the best way to go back home. It would have been nicer for them to say, yeah, I hope you feel better soon. But it was very clear that's what I needed to do. I got home, I was back in my own bed, but I was in a lot of pain. And one of the thoughts I had was how embarrassing it was going to be if I had to go back into hospital. But what I did do was to breathe. It was the only thing I could do. And to my fascination, I found that if I kept my mind 100% on my in-breath and 100% on my out-breath, the pain lessened. And then there'd be a wobble and the pain would come back more intense. And then I'd come back to my breathing and it would lessen the pain. And I carried on like that for the rest of the night. And it carried me through that crisis. And after that, things kind of very slowly improved. But it was such a powerful teaching. And yes, then I wanted to practice. I tried the practice and found it to be very, very beneficial. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about was a story about a lovely woman I met. This is some years ago. I'd been invited to offer some meditation and physical exercises and deep relaxation at the local hospital in the stroke unit, people recovering from strokes and also heart attacks. And there were some lovely people there. And the thing that was very noticeable was the amount of stress and anxiety, that if they started moving, they might set off another heart attack, so lack of confidence. And there was one woman in particular, I think she was a retired headmistress, quite formidable, but also very kind. And after a few weeks, she came to me and said, Lesley, it's taken me 80 years to learn how to breathe. And she told me how much it was helping her, the breathing, to cope with the anxiety and the fear of having another stroke, the fear of having another nosebleed. And I was very moved to hear that. And eventually she was ill again, and she was back in hospital. And I went to visit her, and she was lying in her bed with lots of tubes and nurses around her bed. And she looked at me and smiled and winked and said, "I'm still breathing." That was the last time I saw her. So I want to breathe, I want to practice breathing, but the question is, how do we maintain the practice and not fall into forgetfulness? Because I do. Even though I want to practice, I fall into forgetfulness. And I think for me, I reflect that it's an art. It's an art to learn and to cultivate. And I think that's the thing I'd like to reflect on a little bit. Maybe it'll resonate with you, maybe if you're an artist. Or if you're not an artist, you are now with this practice. So although the sutra's very scientific, there's room for creativity and art too. I'm a potter, and I teach Tai Chi. They're both sort of arts, I suppose. And both of them require a lot of repetition. Lots and lots and lots of repetition, going over the same thing again and again and again. And I came to this practice from 12 years training in martial arts, where the breath was the key to the training, particularly in Tai Chi. Tai Chi is described as a moving meditation. Maybe some of you practice Tai Chi. And I'm very grateful to my teacher for what I learned from him. But it was only when I came to this practice that I really finally discovered just how transformational the breath can be. In Tai Chi, it's very grounding, the body relaxed, and the breath down here in the Tian. So when we breathe down here. And I believe this is how babies breathe. If we think about the language we use, when if we're upset, our energy is up. The energy is up here. But we want to calm down. We might say to children, settle down. It's about bringing our energy back down here. So that's something that I learned from Tai Chi. And I think the other thing is this sense of the center of our body. We have a center, and this morning in our Qigong we were, I can't do this, practicing in our center. But Tai Chi and Qigong is about going over the same ground again and again and again, practicing the same movement again and again and again, until it becomes natural, second nature. We don't have to think about it. We've sort of absorbed it through our skin like osmosis. And I can't help now likening that to our practice. And there was an occasion when I, some years ago, reading a wonderful commentary from Thai's book, Blooming of a Lotus. I think that's something, a book that maybe many Sanghas use, and the beautiful commentaries. And in this commentary, Thai actually talked about the Tantien. And at that moment, for me, I had Tai Chi here and I had the practice there, and they just came together. No separation. And it was very, very helpful to me, because I think I'd been seeing my life in sort of, I do Tai Chi, I make pots, and then over here somewhere else, more practice, and they all came together, and I see it's all one. Whatever we do in life, that is our practice. I think there was just one thing I wanted to add about the art of breathing, is a little bit of humor goes a long way. I think, we should be able to smile at ourselves when it doesn't, go so well. Smile to our frailties. And I could tell you a few stories, I probably won't now. I think some people find it difficult to sit still. And Tai Chi is a moving meditation. It can be very, very helpful. And I think walking meditation is a wonderful practice. I think there are times when I've perhaps been upset or something big's happened. I can't sit, but I can go walking, and I can find that incredibly helpful. And a friend of mine told me this Latin phrase, forgive my Latin, solvitur ambulando. Solvitur ambulando, I don't know if you know the expression. Solve it by walking. And how true that can be, to go for a walk and come back and find myself in a very different frame of mind. Just have a sound of the bell. Tai Chi is a very ancient practice, and it practices with the concept of Qi, energy, the life force, breath of life. And these days we hear it referred to as energy medicine. There's masses of research available, and proof of the the power of breathing as a form of healing, but we know it's a very ancient form of medicine. So I learned about centering my body in Tai Chi. But the other thing I mentioned to you was pottery. And that's very much about centering. I'm really going to have to put this microphone down so that I can demonstrate throwing a pot. Would that be possible, Kev? I hope everyone can hear me. Yes. Thumbs up. I like throwing pots, and I have taught throwing as well. So one has the ball of clay, and you throw it straight on the wall head. Get a little bit of suction there. And then with water and the wheel going fast, put the hands onto top of the clay and around the clay to bring it into the center. Too tight, and it starts to do this. Not enough pressure, and then the clay determines, and it sort of goes all over the place, which is what children love. They love it when it's going all over the place. So we bring the clay into the center, and then we pull it up into a cone so that all the clay is centered, and push it back down so that clay is centered. Then the thumb goes in, and the thumb pulls a hollow shape. We establish the base. This is how my teacher taught me. And then the hand goes in, and maybe the knuckle on the outside, and you begin to lift the clay. It's called lifting, pulling, in order to form a cylinder. So you end up with a cylinder of this wonderful rippling movement, and then from there you can maybe lift again and get the shape that one wants. And this wonderful rippling pot on the wheel is said to be running true. That's the expression that's used in pottery. And couldn't we use just that same expression in our practice? When we're in our center, we're running true. If we're following our breathing, we're aware of our body, we're centered in ourselves. Working with clay's taught me a lot. It's been a really good teacher. And it's such a humble material. It's the earth itself, a form of sedimentary rock that's maybe taken hundreds of thousands of years to form. And it's such a humble material to work with. I believe roses grow very well on clay, so I'm told. And I wanted to tell you a story about that. Thank you. I was on retreat at Plum Village. I was staying in the new hamlet. And during working meditation one day, we were asked to help to plant some roses. Lovely. That's the sort of thing I really like doing. And as I dug a hole, I came across clay. And I rather ignored the rose after that and got into the digging. I was really surprised, and it looked like quite good clay. So I dug quite a bit out, and I asked one of the monastics, would it be okay to take this home? Yes. She also mentioned that at another Shonha temple, the little temple that's down the hill from the upper hamlet, also had clay. So during a day of mindfulness, I was able to go down there and get more clay. I ended up coming home with quite a nice big bag of clay, and didn't know what it was going to be like, but I broke it down into slip and sieved it to sieve out any roots or stones or grit that might be in it, wedged it back up into a nice pliable state, and threw some bowls. Not many, there wasn't a huge amount of clay, but enough to make a few bowls. And I wrote on the bowls, I entrust myself to the earth. She entrusts herself to me. And doing that brought me a lot of joy. And some short time afterwards, the organizers of one of the Nottingham retreats, it might have been the final one, 2012, maybe some of you were there. The organizers wanted to give Ty a little thank you present, and were wondering what to give him. And I said, well, I've got some pots. Would that be a possible present? And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. So that's what we did. So on the last morning, Thai was given these pots. So again, I felt very happy to think that this clay was going back home to Plum Village. I don't know what happened to it. But in making a pot, it said that it sort of takes 7 years training to learn to throw. And I'm sure that's right, and I'm sure it's longer. So one has to learn the technique in order to be creative. Too much technique and it can look a bit mechanical. Too much creativity, but no technique can lead to a pretty, not a terribly good pot. So it needs to be a balance of the two. And my teacher, who's with us, I brought his photograph. He's rowing a boat. Guy is my wonderful teacher. And he used to say, technique and creativity need to go along together. They need to go along together. And couldn't that be said of our practice? We need to breathe, we need the discipline and the practice, but also to make it fresh, to practice in a way that is true for ourselves. So I think with my working life, it's been one of repetition, going over the same movements again and again and again, again and again for years, months, years. But throwing, repetition, making the same movements on the wheel again and again and again. And some people might think that's very boring, how dull. But I found it very joyful, actually. And made me feel grounded and stable. And very freeing, I think, very freeing. So whether it's, making pots, doing Tai Chi, playing a musical instrument. Somebody said to me this morning, Charlie, he brought his guitar with him. He said, I practice every day. And I think, excellent. Tai once came up with this word, kung fu, that we could see our practice, have a little book, call it our kung fu book, and make a note in it every day how we've practiced. And the word kung fu, yes, it's a martial art, and I used to love it. I used to practice kung fu in my younger days. But it has a much wider meaning. Kung fu is, we talk about qigong, and gong comes from kung fu as well. And it's about work or discipline, the thing we put our heart into and our effort into. So Charlie's kung fu might be playing the guitar. And my kung fu is making pots. I wonder what yours is. And I think the thing I'd like to just finish with is coming back to the Sutra, coming back to the 16 exercises. And something I touched on earlier. We start with the breath, and if we work through the exercises, we arrive at nirvana and letting go. But why not start right now, breathing and letting go? Because life isn't quite that methodical, is it? Maybe there are times when we need to really focus on our body, and times when we need to take care of our emotions. So we come in and out of the sutra. And I think for me, the first time, I found it really quite difficult. Second time I looked at it, I understood some things that I hadn't understood before. And I think it's a sutra to come back to many times. It's really at the heart of our practice. So we're artists. The art of mindful living has got to be the ultimate art form. The art of breathing. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I let go. I let go of tension. I let go of worries. I can put all that baggage down that I've been carrying around. Breathing in, I come back to my in-breath. Breathing out, I let go. Thank you so much.